Now, earlier this week, the Garda Commissioner Drew Harris said more Gardaí should be posted abroad to help deal with the threat of cybercrime. He said more Irish people are becoming victims of internet security breaches, much of it being carried out by criminals who are operating from overseas. Well, the European Union's law enforcement agency Europol has warned of emerging threats, among them the rollout of the 5G mobile network, which is already being trialled here in Ireland. Well, Nicole van der Meulen is a senior strategic analyst with Europol and an expert in cybercrime. She'll be addressing the Zero Day Con, a conference on cybersecurity, which takes place in Dublin on Thursday. I spoke to her earlier. I began first by asking her about those comments from Drew Harris about the importance of international cooperation when tackling cybercrime.
I mean, international cooperation is key. And at Europol, it's obviously part of our DNA, which may sound cliche, but without it, we wouldn't even exist. I mean, that is our core function, to support and coordinate international investigations with the primary focus on the EU. So international cooperation is really, I mean, the most important element. The way I sort of try to describe it to people, and that goes beyond purely between law enforcement, because a lot of other parties are also involved, is we basically all hold a chapter of the story. So if we only read our own chapter, we are missing most of the information because we don't really know who the characters are or how they fit together. So basically, to bring the full picture out, we have to bring all this information together, and we have to be able to say that the police force in different countries needs to help with that, needs to carry out, for example, arrests or parts of the investigation.
And we know, of course, that cybercrime is not it doesn't recognise borders. But what are the most common forms of attack? Is it still mostly financially motivated?
I mean, a lot of it is financially motivated, but there's a lot of other motives, especially if you look at the threat actor model. It could be a nation state sponsored attack. It could be coming from ideological reasons. And the main thing is that it's very difficult to distinguish between the different type of actors because they all use tools basically from the same toolbox. So what we often speak about at Europol is a convergence of criminality, especially with cybercrime as a service. So people can go online, they can rent a botnet, or they can pay for other services. And that means that even people with very low technical capabilities can enter the cybercrime scene. And on top of that, I would say when we focus on emerging threats, it could also be existing threats that are merely evolving. So if we look at our internet organized crime threat assessment that we published last year, we looked back at what we published 5 years ago, and a number of the threats we reported last year, such as ransomware, such as distributed denial of service attacks, developments in the dark web marketplaces, we reported about 5 years ago as well, but they were very elementary. So, for example, ransomware had police ransomware. It did not use encryption. When it comes to dark web marketplaces, I mean, 2014 was the year of Silk Road. So for the general public, I would argue that's the first time we even became acquainted with the existence of dark web marketplaces. And now it's a main priority.
One of the emerging technological advances is the rollout of 5G mobile networks, which will allow, of course, for super fast broadband connections almost anywhere. And it's positive, obviously, because it will connect us to the technologies of the future, self-driving cars, household smart devices, things like that. But you also have concerns about 5G, about it providing an opportunity for cyber criminals.
Definitely. And it basically, it provides two different opportunities, I would say. And one is obviously 5G, as you mentioned, it will give access to vastly higher quantities of data. It will significantly broaden attack services, and arguably will be more dependent on 5G for mission-critical applications than we were on 4G. And it offers more potential entry points, which inherently makes it more vulnerable. The other opportunity they have, and that from a law enforcement is also a major concern, is that the way 5G is being developed might give criminals more tools to make it more difficult for law enforcement to trace them.
This is because if you operate with 5G, you get a temporary identifier rather than a unique identifier, which is the case with 4G networks. So how much more difficult is it then to track people down if they're using 5G as part of a cyber attack?
I mean, it's much more difficult because we have to be able to to intercept the communication, which will become more difficult. But the other difficulty is, as you say, with temporary identifiers, they can use different network providers because it will look for the shortest route of communication because it's all about efficiency. And as such, it really comes down to cooperation with network providers, but some of the data may not be available at all. That's actually a much bigger concern.
And then there's the issue, as you mentioned, with speeds, the transfer speeds. They're going to be so great that stealing large amounts of data, that will take seconds.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the matter of scalability. Like once you get access, obviously, and it concerns such high quantities of data, yeah, it's much easier to then obtain them.
What about protecting, for people to protect themselves then against cyber attacks? I mean, what advice would you give to people?
I mean, it's exceptionally difficult. Within my team, we do deal with prevention and awareness, but prevention and awareness can only go so far. I mean, it is about being aware of the fact, especially as we move into 5G and the Internet of Things, that every device is a potential point of entry. If you have a smart device, it is like a computer or like a phone. So it contains data. It is an entry point to your house. So I think much has to do with that type of awareness, and then subsequently really looking at how secure is this device to the point you can actually look into that. Because one of our main concerns, for example, is that manufacturers of Internet of Things objects are not primarily concerned about security. So the software might contain vulnerabilities, and they're not too concerned about releasing updates to patch those vulnerabilities. And if there's no update available, there's really nothing you can do as an ordinary citizen. So I would say do some due diligence research before you buy a device, before you connect it.
One of the things people, I suppose, need to be aware of then is that with the technology of the future, people have coffee machines, light bulbs, toasters, all connected to the internet, but they're also, of course, connected to your credit card, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, if there's a functionality of what we call, for example, with in-app purchases, if there is an in-device functionality where you can make a purchase, yeah. It could be connected, like you say, to your credit card or to other personal information that you may not want to see compromised. And the other thing, of course, and that comes back to the entry point, is the actual device, once entered or compromised by a criminal, can also be sabotaged. I mean, it can become an actual instrument of an attack. I mean, then the coffee machine or the toothbrush might not be that interesting, but in theory, it is possible.
And that was Europol's Nicole van der Meulen speaking to me earlier, and she will be speaking at Zero Day Con conference on Thursday.